In today's class, we are going to explore how to create a responsive layout grid system for desktop, tablets, and mobile devices. But before we begin, let us take a quick recap of the product design process for the current website case study we are working on. In our current website case study, we have moved from branding the product, or we have moved from the branding stage to the user experience design stage. And we want to go into high fidelity designs, which is the user interface design stage. We already know that the product design process actually begins with the inception of the idea, after which we go into branding the idea. Branding the idea actually involves coming up with a brand guide, which we treated in our last class. And we know that the brand guide is going to be comprised of the company logo, the brand colors, where we talked about the primary colors, secondary color, and tertiary color. Then for our typography system, we decided that for this website case study, we are going to be using Titanium Web for both the body text and headline text. Now, the brand guide also contains things like imagery and illustration style, the brand voice or tone, and also the tagline or slogan, which we also treated in our last class. So we completed the branding process in our last class. For the user experience design stage, we have looked into the stakeholder interview stage, the competitor analysis stage. We also came up with site mapping and information architecture after carrying out a usability audit on our competitor's website. And also, we looked into coming up with low fidelity wireframes and mid fidelity wireframes. After the mid fidelity wireframing, or after the wireframing presentation of each of these pages, the next stage is to go into the high fidelity designs. And this is where the UI designer is going to come in to come up with aesthetics and also what is referred to as a design system. In order for us to actually go into the high fidelity design stage, the UI designer is going to need a brand guide, which we have already treated. And then the UI designer is going to come up with a style guide and folders, or style guide and repositories, and also come up with what is referred to as a design system documentation. In our previous class, we looked at how to create style guides and repositories, and we looked at creating a style, attaching and detaching a style, and we also looked at how to edit a style. So we created color styles for the brand colors, and also we created imagery styles for vibrant and muted images. In today's class, we are going to be focusing on design system documentation. And for design system documentation, we are going to be looking at how to come up with an industry standard grid system. So today's class is going to be coming up with a responsive layout grid system for all the screens that we want to design for, which include the desktop screen, the tablet screen, and also the mobile screen. In coming up with a responsive layout grid, we are going to learn how to set up a responsive layout grid system and also adapt it to different screen sizes and orientations so we can achieve consistency across layouts. But before we come up with a responsive layout grid system, I want us to look at a few layout terminologies. And for the layout terminologies, I want us to look at three major ones, which are the screen width, the breakpoint, and what is also referred to as a safe content area. So for the layout terminologies, I want us to look at the screen width, the breakpoint, and the safe content area. Now, in looking at the screen width, we already know that for the devices, we are going to need a desktop layout, a tablet layout, and a mobile layout. So I'll simply bring back my panels, and then I'm going to click on the frame tool over here. Once I click on the frame tool, automatically you are going to have a lot of layouts or a lot of frames from which you can actually pick from here on your properties panels. So we are going to have mobile layouts or mobile frames, and it's going to be under this region that talks about phones. And then for the next category, we are going to have tablet layouts. For the next category, we are going to have desktop layouts, and there are a lot of other categories here, even down to social media layouts. But since we are designing for just desktop, tablet, and mobile, we are going to be using just these first three that we have over here. So if I am to actually make a layout or select a layout for my mobile device, I'll come over here, click on this drop down. You are going to see that I have quite a number of screens from which I can make a decision to actually make my design. All right, I have the iPhone SE layout, we have the iPhone 13 mini layout, we have the iPhone 14 Plus layout, up to this Android compact layout. Now you can decide to actually pick any of these layouts in order for you to make your mobile design. So for the purpose of this class, we are going to be, first of all, be going with the iPhone 13 mini layout. So I'm going to click on this. Now, the moment I click on it, I have the iPhone 13 mini layout now in my Figma canvas. All right, you can see that over here on the layers panel, it says iPhone 13 mini. So I have this in my Figma canvas. These layouts actually come with a predetermined width. All right, so the width of this layout is already 375 pixels. And right now, the height of the layout is 812 pixels. We already know that the height can actually be adjusted. It can be increased or decreased because, of course, when these are actually represented on a mobile device, they are actually scrollable. So for that reason, we have that the height can actually be what, increased or reduced. But for the purpose of this particular layout, we know fully well that the width is going to be constant, right? So the width of our devices, be it on a desktop, mobile, or tablet layout, is actually going to be constant. And that is why the screen width is considered constant or is said to have a fixed physical size. So if I'm to choose a mobile layout, I could choose this as my mobile layout and do my website designs inside this layout. Alternatively, I could go back to the frame tool. I'll click on it, and then under the mobile layout, instead of picking the iPhone 13 mini layout, I can decide to pick any other layout that I want here. I can decide to come over here and pick the iPhone 16 Pro Max layout. So I'm going to click on that. The moment I click on that, you can now see that we have the iPhone 16 Pro Max layout, and it comes with its own width, which is actually 440 pixels, which is wider than that of the iPhone 13 mini layout. All right, so I can decide to use this layout for my mobile designs, or I can decide to use this layout for my mobile designs, or you could decide to pick any of the layouts here under the mobile category. Since we have different screens, or since we have different layouts under the mobile category, it therefore means that we could have what is referred to as a screen width for this particular category. So right now, I'm going to go to Material Design Tool. I'll come over here to my browser, then I'm going to type in Material Design Tool. Once I click on that, when the results come up, I'm going to click on this region that says Responsive Layout Design or Responsive Layout Grid. I'll click on that. Then once I click on it, it's going to take me to a page where I'm going to have different layouts with a range of values for different screen widths. So when that loads up, I'm going to scroll over to where it says Breakpoints. I'll click on that. And once I click on it, we are going to have a table. And on this table, we have screen size. Now you can see that we have a range of values from 0 to 599 dp. And they all fall under the category of the phone, or they all fall under the category of a mobile device. This simply means that we could have a mobile device or any device that has a screen size within 0 to 599 is actually a mobile device. So you can see that for all these mobile devices, the screen size, which is actually the width, because this screen size over here represents the width. This value that I have here, or this range, which is 0 to 599, represents the width of that particular screen. Okay, so it represents the width of the screen. And like I said, for each of the devices, or for each of these mobile devices, the screen or the width is going to be constant. The only thing that you can adjust is the height, right? Which makes it scrollable. So we have now seen that for this particular device, has a width of 375 pixels. For this other device, it has a width of 440 pixels, and they all fall under this range, or this screen size range of 0 to 599 dp. So for your mobile devices, you could decide to pick any of them. Once you click on the frame tool, you are going to have a list of devices that you could. All right, so in my case, I first of all selected the iPhone 13 mini and then selected the iPhone 16 Pro device. So you could decide to pick any of these for your presentation on a mobile device. So now I'm going to collapse that for the mobile devices, and then I'm going to move to the next device, which is tablet device. Let me take this out. I'll come back now to the frame tool. I'll click on it. Once I click on it, I have now selected two possible frames or layouts that I could use for my mobile device. Right? In this case now, I want to select another frames or layout that I'm going to use under a different category, which is for the tablet device. So I'll click on that drop down, and you can see that we have quite a number of layouts that you could select from for your tablet website presentation. So in this case, I'm going to start by picking the iPad Pro 12.9 layout or frame. So I'll click on that, and you can see that we have this particular frame over here. Right? Now, if I to check the width of this frame, you can see that over here, the width falls under 1024 pixels. So that is the exact width of this particular frame. If I go back to material design, under the screen size or under the range of values for the width, I want to find out where this particular device is going to fall under. So I'll come back here. Since the width of that is 1024 pixels, we are going to check each of the range that we have here. This is 0 to 599. This is 600 to 904. This is 905 to 1239, which simply means that 1024 pixels falls under this region. And you can see that for this particular range, they actually belong to the tablet category. Therefore, confirming once more that this is actually a tablet device. Now, aside from this, I could also decide to pick another size of frame for my tablet device. So I will go back to the tablet category. I'm going to come over here to this frame 2. I'll click on it. And under the tablet category, we're choosing the iPad Pro 12.9 screen. Alright, so right now I want to choose iPad mini 8.3. So I'll click on this. And this also is another tablet device. So this is a tablet device and this is also a tablet device. At the moment you select a device, the first thing that you want to pay attention to is the width of that device. Alright, because like I said, you can always adjust the height of the device, but the width remains constant. So in this case, the width of this device is 744 pixels. So you can go back to material design and check for the screen category or the screen range where that width actually falls within. Now, since the width of this is 744 pixels, I'll come back here. And you can see that 744 pixels falls within 600 and 904 over here. So automatically, that device is also a tablet device because this range is what is a tablet range. So now we've been able to select 2 layouts each for our mobile device, which we could use. We've also been able to select 2 layouts each for our tablet device, which we could also use. After that, I would want us to select 2 layouts also for our desktop device. So in order for us to do that, I'll come back again to the frame tool. I'll click on the frame tool and automatically I will come back here and collapse this tablet category and go to the desktop category. I'm going to expand this and you can see that we have a list of layouts of frames that you could use for desktop presentation. So I'll come back here and then the first layout I'm going to select is this layout here that is labeled desktop. I'll click on that. And once I click on it, you can now see that we have a layout here that we could use for our desktop presentation. And like I said, the moment you select a layout, the first thing you want to do is take note of the size or take note of the width of that particular layout. Now in this case now, the width of this layout is 1440 pixels. So you can go back to material design and check for the screen size or the width range that we have here to know where that particular device falls into. Since the width is 1440 pixels, I'll come back here and you can see that that width size falls under this category and over here it falls under the large or desktop category, letting us know that that is also a desktop. So this category is for any screen size that is equal to 1440 pixels and above, and that's the reason you have 1440 plus, letting us know that any screen size that falls or is equal to 1440 pixels and above falls under the desktop category. So I have one particular layout that I could use for my desktop presentation. Now let's look at us selecting another layout that could also be used for our desktop presentation. I'll come back here again, click on that frame tool, and instead of picking desktop, in this case, I'm going to come over here and select the MacBook Pro 16 device. So I'll click on that. Once I click on it, you now see that we have a MacBook Pro 16 device. Of course, the width of this in this case is 1728 pixels. If I go back to material design, you can see that that width also falls under this category, which is also a desktop device. So now you know how to identify mobile devices, you know how to identify tablet devices, and you know how to identify desktop devices. Now that we know how to identify each of these devices, we are now done with the screen width for the devices that we actually want to use for our website presentation, both on a mobile device, both on a tablet device, and both on a desktop device. Now, it is important for you to know that the screen width is actually constant, or it has a fixed physical size, which simply means that it will be wrong of you to actually select a particular layout from here. For example, let me make a copy of this. It will be wrong of you to select a particular layout and increase the size of this particular layout in terms of its width. All right, this is actually not good design practice. Now, the only part of the dimension of this screen that you could possibly increase is the height. All right, and that's what actually makes this particular frame or layout scrollable inside a display. All right, inside a visual display, that's what is going to make this scrollable. So increasing the width is not good design practice. You have to use the width of this layout exactly as we've gotten them from these categories of frames that we have here, right? So that's why the width is said to be constant or has a fixed physical size. So the size of an iPhone 13 mini will always be 375 pixels in terms of its width. The size of an iPhone 16 Pro Max will always be 440 pixels in terms of its width. The same thing for that of an iPad, and the same thing for the desktop category. So with that, now we now know how to select different layers with screen width. I will now know that the screen width will always be constant, or it will always have a fixed physical size. Now after the screen width, another terminology that what I want us to look at is what is referred to as a breakpoint. In order for us to actually explain the breakpoint concepts, I'm going to take a responsive footer design. So I'll come over here and then I'm going to make a copy of this. I'll make a copy of this responsive footer, and then I'm going to paste that copy here. And we are going to realize that at this particular layout or at this particular size, this responsive footer is going to fit into a mobile device. So for example, I can bring any of these devices. Let me select this mobile device, and then let me make a copy and bring it here. And then let me increase the height of that particular mobile device. So I'll select this and increase the height of that device. Now I already know that the width of this device here is 375 pixels, right? So I'll come back to my responsive footer and try to adjust that to 375 pixels. So I'll come over to the width of this my footer design, and I'll make this 375 pixels. And then I have something like this. So I'll make a copy of this, and then I'm going to fit it inside this particular layout. So I'll make that copy, and then I'll try to fit it inside my mobile layout. All right, so I'll select this, align it to the center, and then align it to the bottom of the layout. Now you can see that this fits exactly into my mobile layout. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a tablet layout. So I'll come over here, make a copy of my iPad Pro 12.9 layout, make a copy of that, and then I'm going to bring that copy over here. And then I'm going to take this exact same responsive footer that I have and try to fit it inside this particular frame. And what's going to happen is that I'm going to select this now and I'll bring it down. And then I'm going to make a copy of this and place the copy here. Now, since this width is actually wider than that of the mobile frame, I'm going to try to increase the width of this particular responsive footer. So I will come over here, hold and drag on the footer. Now you can see that the moment I hold and I drag on the footer, you can notice that the elements that are within this particular layout automatically rearrange themselves in order for them to fit into the new size that I now have. I'm going to Ctrl Z to undo that action, and then I'm going to hold and drag on it again. The moment I hold and drag on this, you can see that the elements are actually rearranging themselves, right? So for this first instance, I hold and drag, the elements are rearranged themselves. Now I have something like this. So I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'll bring it here, and then hold and drag it again. I'll try to increase the length or width of this particular footer. So I'll come over here, hold and drag on this. You can see that the elements within this particular layout or footer has actually rearranged again. So I'll make another copy of this, hold and drag on this, and then bring it here. And then try to increase the width once more by holding and dragging on the side. Now you can see that the elements have also rearranged themselves again in order for them to be visually balanced inside this particular size of frame or layout that I now have. Now remember that we started this entire process with one footer design, which is this footer design, right? And when we begin to expand the length of this footer design, automatically the elements inside the footer changes or readjust themselves in order for them to become visually balanced in the new layout that is created. Now at different points, you can realize that the elements that are actually rearranged, they rearrange at different points, and those points are referred to as the breakpoint of this particular footer design. And that is why the breakpoint is referred to as a flexible property. The breakpoint of a layout is actually a flexible property. So a breakpoint is more like a specific screen size or a specific screen width at which the layout structure, the styling or grid system changes to adapt to the device or screen size that you want to fit it into. So the breakpoint is the screen width where a layout shifts or reconfigures to remain responsive, just like we've seen in this particular case with this responsive footer. Now, if I select this responsive footer, let me select the mobile version and then bring it down here. You will realize that at different widths, just like we saw, while expanding the size of the footer, the elements within the footer are going to be rearranging themselves. So this is the size of this footer at a width of 375 pixels, which corresponds to that of a mobile device. So if I hold and drag on this, you can see that we still have the elements arranged the way they are, but it will get to a point where these elements are going to rearrange themselves. All right. Now that will be seen as the first breakpoint. All right. So this is the first breakpoint. If I hold and drag on this and I bring it here and I continue to increase the width of this screen, you can now see that we have another rearrangement based on the size of this particular screen, right? Now this could be seen as the second breakpoint. If I hold and drag on this and I place it here and I continue to increase the width of this particular screen, you can see that it has now rearranged itself again, right, at another breakpoint. Now it happens at a particular width, all right? If I keep increasing the width of this, let's try to increase slowly and let's see what we have. And once I keep increasing, you can see that the structure remains the same, but it gets to a particular width where automatically it rearranges itself. And that is what we refer to as the breakpoint of this particular layout. Now, the breakpoint makes it possible for a given responsive design or a given responsive footer like this to actually fit into different screen sizes, since these screen sizes will always be fixed, right? So take note of the fact that your screen sizes for your layouts, your mobile layouts, your iPad layouts, and then for your desktop layout, their width will always be fixed. But the breakpoint of your design layout, like your footer, will be flexible enough in order to fit into these fixed sizes of the screens that we have. So I have my iPad layout here. So I'm going to come over here and pick a desktop layout. Let's make a copy of that and bring it here. Now I have a desktop layout over here. So now I'm going to take this same footer and at the different breakpoints, I'm going to try to fit it into each of these layers that I have here. So I'm going to highlight all these copies and then take them out. All right. We already aligned the mobile size version of the footer inside a mobile frame. All right. So I'm going to take this exact footer that I have here. Let me select this and take it out. I'll make a copy of this footer. I'll bring it here. And then I know fully well that the size of this screen is actually 1024 pixels. So I'm going to come over to this design footer, which is very responsive, and change the width to 1024 pixels. And then I have something like this, all right, at a different breakpoint. So I'm going to hold this and then drag it and try to fit it into this frame. I'm going to align that to the center and then align it to the bottom. And you can see that it fits perfectly into this iPad Pro 12.9 inches frame. Now what I'm going to do is I'll make a copy of this and then I'm going to change the breakpoint of this particular layout so it fits into this particular desktop device. So I'll come over here and check for the size of that desktop frame. The size of that desktop frame now is 1440 pixels. So I'll come over here, select this and make that 1440 pixels. So this will be 1440. Automatically, this gives us a new breakpoint because now the elements are going to rearrange themselves in such a way that they are visually balanced inside this desktop layer. So I'll come over here, align that to the center and align it to the bottom. So we can now see that the breakpoint of this footer design is actually flexible. So there are different breakpoints that you could have for a particular layout design, but the screens where you are going to be placing each of those designs, or the screens where you are going to be placing the layouts based on their existing breakpoints, are going to have fixed sizes. The screen of the mobile device will always, in this case, for the iPhone 13 mini with 375 pixels, the screen of this iPad device will be 1024 pixels. The screen of this desktop device will be 1440 pixels, right? So it is your responsive layout that you are going to give different breakpoints that will enable them to actually fit within each of these screen sizes. Now, one question you may want to ask would be, how do we know how to set up our breakpoint values for each of these screen sizes? Or how do you know how to set up different breakpoints for a particular auto layout design? That we are going to find out by applying minimum and maximum width, and also by applying the wrapping feature once we get into the high fidelity design stage of our current case study project. All right. But at this point, note that there's actually a difference between the breakpoint and the screen size. Now, it is very possible that a breakpoint might be equal to your screen size when you are actually setting or giving a type setting for your breakpoint. But take note of the fact that a breakpoint doesn't have to equal the screen size all the time. All right, so it can be equal to the screen size, it can be less than the screen size, it can be greater than the screen size. Now, what does that mean? I can come over here, select this, and then once I reduce the width, you can now see that there's also another breakpoint. All right, and this is also less than the screen size at this particular stage. Right, so your breakpoint is not compulsory that it must be equal to the screen size. Right, so in setting the breakpoint, there are times where you may want it to be equal to the screen size, and then you give it the same size or width as the screen. There are times where you may want to give it a value above the width of the screen. There are times where you may want to give it a value below the width of the screen, right? So it's not very compulsory that the breakpoint must be equal to the width of the screen, but there are times where it can be equal, there are times where it can be greater, or there are times that it can be less. Now, those we are going to see once we get to the high fidelity design stage. So at this point, you now know that we have what is referred to as screen width, which is constant. You now know that we have what is referred to as breakpoint, and breakpoint is actually flexible. So if I should go over to our material design guide, over here, you can see that it says here that on a tablet at a breakpoint of 600 dp, say this layout grid uses 8 columns. Now you can see that for this particular case, the breakpoint refers to the screen width, all right, because this extends from this left side of the screen to the right side of the screen or layout. So in this case, we have the breakpoint being equal to the length of the screen. But like I said, it's not always compulsory that the breakpoint must be equal. It could be equal to it, right? It could be less than it, or it could be greater than it, depending on the type settings or values that you put in as the breakpoint. So under the layer terminologies, we've looked at the screen width, we've looked at the breakpoint. We now know what a breakpoint is, and we now know the difference between a breakpoint and the screen width. Now, I want us to look at what is referred to as the safe content area or body of a layout. Let's look at the safe content area or body of a layout. Before we look at the safe content area or body of a layout, I want us to have a quick look at the elements of a responsive layout grid. The three main elements that make up a responsive layout grid are columns, gutters, and margins. Now, in order for us to explain this, let's quickly come over here to our Figma canvas. I'm going to select the frame tool and then hold and drag on it and create a random size frame. I have something like this. Now, for us to see the elements of a responsive layout grid, that simply means that we need to apply a layout guide or a layout grid to this particular created frame. So I'll come over here where it says layout guide, go to the right, click on that plus icon there. You can see when I hover on it, it says add layout guide. So I'll click on it. Automatically, by default, we are going to have box grids applied to that particular layout. Now, in my own case, I want to actually change this from the box grids that I have to either column grids or row grids, because your grids could either be box grids, vertical grids, or horizontal grids. Now, the box grids are what we have here now, where we have vertical and horizontal line crossing each other, forming little boxes. Now, in this case, what I have is a box grid, right? You could also have vertical grids, which are referred to as columns, or you could also have horizontal grids, which are referred to as rows. So in this case, I want to have column grids. So I'm going to come over here and click on columns. Automatically, it changes that from that box or from those box grids to column grids. I'm going to come over here and change the color of these, my columns, to some form of gray. Now I have something like this. All right. The moment you apply a grid property to a layout and then choose whether you are going to have a box grid or column grid or row grid, automatically you are dividing that layout into sections. Now, in order for us to see the sections, I'm going to first of all come over here and give this any random margin value, because this is a configuration tab now for our grid. So I'll come over here and give this any random margin value. I'm going to give that a margin of 40 pixels. Now I have something like this. Or let's make that 100 pixels. Now we have something like this. Now, the moment you apply a grid to a particular layout and give it a margin, automatically you've divided that layout into two major regions. We have the region that is going to have the content or page elements, and then we have a region that is not going to contain any content or page elements. And that is what we have over here. What we have what is referred to as a safe content area or the body of the layout, and also we have some empty spaces at the left and at the right of this particular layout. Now, once a grid property is applied to a layout like we have over here, you are going to have in this case, we have a right margin, which is this empty space that we have here. And over here, we have a left margin, which is this empty space that we have here, which simply means that in making your designs, this region of your layout is going to be left empty. Also, this region of your layout is going to be left empty. Now, if you go to most websites, you are going to realize that at the left-hand side, we have no elements over there, right? This helps in giving your layout visual balance, all right? This also contributes to the hierarchy and positioning of elements, as well as the aesthetic appeal that the websites or elements are going to have, this little space or empty space that you have here. So over here, what we have here is the left margin, and that's why you can see that there's nothing at this left-hand side. And also, the same thing applies to the right-hand side. So there's always a left margin and a right margin. But in between the left margin and the right margin, you are going to have all your web page elements in between them. All right. Now, this region that you have all your web page elements that's in between the left margin and the right margin is what we refer to as the safe content area or the body of the layout. And the safe content area or body of the layout is comprised of your grid lines. You can see that I have my grid lines inside the safe content area or body of this particular layout. If I should select this particular frame and then come over here, you are going to realize that for this frame, we have 12 column grids here. So we have 12 column grids making up the safe content area of this particular layer that we now have now. So with this being the right margin, which is not going to contain web page elements, and this being the left margin, which will not contain any web page elements. So once you apply a grid property to a layout, you've divided it into a margin section, and also you've also created a section which is referred to as the safe content area or the body of that particular layout. Now, for each of these vertical columns that we have here, there's a space between this column and this column, and that space is this white empty region that we have here. There's also another space between this and this. Now, each of these little spaces is referred to as a gutter. Now, that's what we have here in the configurations tab. We have what is referred to as a gutter. A gutter simply refers to the distance between successive columns, just like we have it here. The distance between this column and this column is this gutter space that we have here. The distance between this and this is this gutter space that we actually have here. So these are the major elements that make up a responsive layout grid. We have the columns, which we've talked about. Then we have what is referred to as the gutters, and then we have the margin. Now, for this particular layout, the safe content area simply refers to the entire region that contains these column grids that I have. So the safe content area is from this top region down to the bottom of the what of that layout or page. That refers to the safe content area for this particular frame. So this is it for the elements of a responsive layout grid. Looking at columns, looking at gutters, and looking at margins. Also, if you go to the material design guide, you are going to realize that over here we equally have those elements over here. We have columns, we have gutters, we have margins, with these vertical bars running from top to bottom being the columns, space between them representing the gutters, right? And then the empty space at the left and the empty space at the right representing what's referred to as the margin of the layout. So now that we know the elements that make up a responsive layout grid, I want us to now look at grid customization. How do you customize a grid to fit a particular layout that you want to use? Now, remember that for applying grids to a particular layout, you can apply vertical grids, which are referred to as columns, or you can apply horizontal grids, which are referred to as rows. So in trying to apply a grid system to our layouts, I will come back now to those particular layouts or frames that we've already selected. Now remember that we selected two layouts for a mobile device. So we selected this to represent our mobile device. We also selected this as an alternative to be used for our mobile device. Then for our iPad device or our tablet device, we selected two layouts as well, which are this and this. Fine. And then for our desktop device, we selected this and this for our desktop device. Now what we are going to do is that we are going to try to apply a grid system to each of these layers and also configure that grid system. Now let us start with our mobile frame. In this case, let's start with the iPhone 13 mini layout. Now for the iPhone 13 mini layout, if you want to apply a grid to any layout, like I said, the first thing you want to do is that you want to actually take notes of the width of that particular layout, which is the screen width. In this case, the width is 375 pixels. So to apply a grid to this, the first thing I want to do is I'll come over to the properties panel. I'm going to scroll down to where it says layout guide, and then At the right hand side, I have this plus or cross icon there. And once I hover on it, it says add layout guide. So I'll click on it. If I click on it, by default, the first grid that is going to be applied to it are box grids, right? I don't want box grids. I want vertical or horizontal grids. So in my case now, I'm going to go for column grids, which are vertical grids. I'll click on columns. Automatically, I have column grids applied to this layout now. Now, but the moment I select a column grid, you are going to realize that we have different properties here that need to be configured alongside the column grids. All right, we have what is referred to as the count or column count. We have what is referred to as the type. We have what's referred to as the width. We have the margin, and then we have the gutter property. So how do I know the count? Because over here, I could have 10 column counts inside my mobile frame, or I could have even a one column inside my mobile frame. So how do I know if I should choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 columns? How do I know the margin space that I'm going to be using for a mobile device? How do I know the gutter value that I'm going to be using for a mobile device? Now, in order for us to actually find this out and configure it, we are going to now reference the material design guide. So I'll go back to the material design guide and click on this point that says breakpoints. So once I click on it, it scrolls down and gives me a table. Now that table is going to contain, as you can see now, the table contains the screen size, which exists as a range. Over here, we have for mobile devices, they have a range of 0 to 599 dp, right? For tablet devices, we have two different range values here. We have this for one category and this for another category. Then for laptop devices, we have this range representing laptop frames. And then for large or desktop layouts, we have that the screen value is 1440 pixels and above, represents a large or a desktop layout. So now we know the possible screen sizes, and for that reason, whatever layout that we are working with here, or whatever screen size, you can always come in here and check for where it fits in. Now after that, on this table, we also have a region for the margin values, like this column talks about the margin. So for a mobile device, there's a margin value that you could use here. For a tablet device, based on the category, there are margin values that you could use here. For laptop device or frame, there are margin values that you could use here. And for desktop device, there are margin values that you could use, right? Then this next column talks about the body. Now the body refers to the safe content area where you can actually put in your content, right? We are not going to be paying a lot of attention to this body region, because once you have your margin sorted, automatically you have the body sorted. Right? Then after that, for the last column, we have what is referred to as the layout columns. Now this talks about the column count. Am I going to be using 4 columns for a mobile device? Am I going to be using 8 columns for a tablet device? What number of columns am I supposed to use for each of the devices? Now those are actually displayed here on this table. Now aside from this, you can see that there is no vertical column that talks about the gutters, because over here we have the count, which you can now find. We have the margin, but we don't have a column for the gutters here. Now for us to get the gutters, what I'm going to do simply is I'm just going to take a copy of this particular page and then paste it here, right? And then scroll to where it talks about gutters. So over here, this talks about margins. Over here, this talks about gutters. Now you can see that we have that on a mobile device, there's a gutter value, right? And then on a tablet device, there's also a gutter value. So now we know how to get our gutter values. Now, since we now have a reference for the column counts, we now have a reference for the margin, and we have a reference for the gutter, it simply means that we can now configure the grid system that we're about to apply to this particular layout. Now, how do we configure the grid system that we want to apply to this layout? To configure your grid system for any particular layout, like I said, the first thing you want to take note of is the width, or to say the breakpoint of that particular layout. In this case, the width value, or the breakpoint in this case, is 375 pixels. So you are going to go back to material design and look for the screen size, because this could be screen size, this could be breakpoint, all right? So look for the screen size or breakpoint range where that particular layer falls into. Now this is 375 pixels for the width. I'll come back here and then check for the first range that I have here. Now this is 0 to 599 dp, or 0 to 599 pixels. So automatically that width size of 375 for this frame falls within 0 to 599, letting me know that this is actually a phone or a mobile device. Now for a phone or a mobile device, what is the margin value? You can see that the margin value here is 16 dp. I'll come back here. For the margin, I could just come here and change that from 0 to 16 dp, which is fine. So now I have a margin value of 16, right margin of 16, and left margin of 16. So I'll go back there. After the margin value, I have my layout columns or column counts as 4. So I'll come back here. Where it says count, I'll change this to 4. Which simply means that for a mobile device, we should be using a column count of 4 according to material design. And then the margin value should be 16 pixels. Now, what about the gutter value? I'll come back now to this region that talks about the gutter. Now, it says on a mobile, for example, at a breakpoint of 360 dp, because we now know that mobile devices can have different breakpoints, considering the fact that any breakpoint value or any screen size value between 0 to 599 is actually a mobile device. So if I have a value of 300, that's a mobile device. If I have a value of 400 dp, that's a mobile device, as long as it is within 0 to 599 dp. So over here it says on a mobile, for example, at a breakpoint of 360 dp, this layout grid uses 16 dp gutters, which simply means that for our mobile devices, our gutter value is going to be 16 dp. So I'll come over here, put in 16. Automatically, I have the gutter value set for this particular mobile frame. So for our count, we now know that we need a column count of 4, which is fine. Now for the color, I could decide to come over here and then change the color to any color that I want. In this case, I want my column grid to be some form of gray. So now I have this. Then for this region that talks about type, we are going to explore the different options that we have there and see which of them is responsive enough for us to pick. So I'll come over here, click on that drop down. Now, by default, it's set to stretch. If I should try left, you can see that all my column grids are now aligned to the left. Now, this is not what I want. So let's try another option. If I try right, I have all of them aligned to the right, which is also not what I want. If I try center, I have them aligned to the center, which is also not what I want. So in this case, I'm just going to leave that type property set to stretch, all right, and have something like this. Now, this is exactly the way I want it. So I'll come back now. I am done with my column count. I'm done with the color. My type will always be set to stretch anytime I'm using column grids, which we have seen. Now, in this case now, anytime you actually take a type set to stretch, this width becomes inactive, which simply means that you cannot interact with it. So automatically it's set to auto. So that remains that because you can't interact with that right now. Now, our margin value from material design is 16, which is fine. And then our gutter value for material design is also 16. So with that now, I have applied a grid system and I've configured it for this particular mobile layout that we now have here. Now take note of the fact that we just configured for one of the layers for a mobile device, right? Because you are going to pick just one layer for a mobile device when you want to actually present or make your designs in a mobile frame. But for the purpose of comparison, we decided to put in 2 frames first, because by the end of the day, we are going to actually select only one of them. So let us see how we can configure a grid system for the iPhone 16 Pro Max, which also falls under the mobile category. Like I said, once you select the frame, the first thing you want to check is the width, right? So the width in this case is 440 pixels. You take note of that. And then you scroll to the bottom under this region that says layout guide. Come over here to this plus icon, click on that. Automatically, I have box grids. I don't want box grids. I'll come over here, change this from box grids to column grids. Now I have this. So now that I have this configuration tab, I can now again look at the width. The width of this frame is 440 pixels. I'll go now to material design, check for the screen size range, and I can see that 440 pixels falls within 0 to 599, which simply means that it is along this row, right? And that is also a phone or a mobile device. So it simply means that the margin value in this case will also be 16 dp, and then the layout columns will also be 4. So I'll come back here for my count or column count. I'll make that 4. The margin value, I'll make this 16 dp, which is fine. We already saw that since this is also a mobile phone or falls under the phone category, the gutter value, the way we saw it from material design, you can see that the gutter value is also 16 dp for any mobile device, irrespective of the width of the mobile device. So I'll come over here, change this to 16 dp. That's fine. So I have a count of 4, a margin of 16, a gutter of 16. For my color, I want to change this to some form of gray, right? Which is fine. And now I have configured for this particular device as well. So now we are done with mobile devices. So any mobile device that you select, this is how you actually configure your grid system for any mobile device that you are going to select. You now know how to identify the device or the width as a mobile frame, right? Using the breakpoint or using the screen width and comparing it to this screen size range that we have here in material design. All right, so take note of that. Now, after setting this up, you may want to know that for the margin value, all right, because the moment you set up your margin value, because now I have my right margin and I have my left margin, And remember that we did not bother about talking about the body, because automatically once we set our right and left margin, any other region that contains the columns becomes what becomes the body. So for that reason, we are not focusing on the value of the body from this particular table. Now, it's important for you to note here that despite the fact that we have a recommendation of 16 dp for our margin value, I could also decide that for my mobile device, I want to use, let's say, a margin of 8 dp, because of course, the margin value determines the content or the area where you can place your content or make your design. So with a margin value of 16 dp, automatically you can only place your content within this region that has what the column grids. Now, there are times where you may want more space while you're actually placing content inside a mobile grid, or you may want more content area. Now, in that case, you could select this mobile frame or any mobile frame that you are using, and then change the margin value from, let's say, 16. You could divide by 2 to make that 8. And automatically, I have a margin value of 8 for my left and right margin. Now, you could work with this, right? For a mobile device, you could work with a margin of 8, or you could work with a margin of 16. Now, you could work with a margin of 8 if you are designing and you want more content area for that particular design on a mobile device, or just work with a margin of 16 if you want to. So in essence, you can pick any value within 8 and 16 and use that as your margin value for a mobile frame. So instead of giving this a margin of 8, you can pick any value between 8 and 16. So I could come over here and pick a margin value of 12 and I'm fine. I could come over here, pick a margin value of 14 and I'm fine. But what you don't do is that don't come over here and pick a margin value of 32, because in that case, you have over reduce the content area for this particular mobile device. So for your margin value, you could pick any value between 8 and 16. Now remember that this is also a guide, right? And that is why there's a range for you to pick from. Okay, so you could pick a margin value of 8, which is fine. You could pick a margin value of 10, a margin value of 12, a margin value of 14, or a margin value of 16. All right, so that is it for my mobile devices. So this margin value could be a minimum of 8 and a maximum of 16. So over here, the margin value should be 8 to 16 for mobile devices. That is it for setting up margin values for mobile devices. So now we are going to look at how to set up a margin value for a tablet device. In trying to apply a layout grid to these other layers that we have here, I'm first of all going to apply a layout grid to the iPad mini 8.3 screen, for the iPad mini 8.3 frame that I have here. So once I select it, come over here. First of all, go to where it says layout guide again. Go to that plus or cross icon, click on it. Automatically, I have box grids here now. What I'm going to do is change this from box grids to column grids, like we always did for the other frames, which is fine. And then after doing this, you want to definitely configure this tab that we have here. So what do? Take note of the width. This is 744 pixels. Now go back to material design. Once you get to material design, look for where 744 pixels fits in. Now 744 fits in within 600 to 904. So this simply means that this row will be used to configure that particular layout. So the margin value for this row here is 32 dp, and then the layout columns is 8. So the column count is 8, margin is 32. So I'll go back to Figma. Alright, column count, I'll change that to 8. And then the margin, I'll change this to 32, which is fine. Now what is going to be the gutter value? And for the gutter value, I'll come back to material design. Of course, we've seen the gutter value for a mobile device. Let's scroll down and let's look for the gutter value for a tablet device. It says here that on a tablet, for example, at a breakpoint of 600 dp, this layout grid uses 24 dp gutter. So automatically, I'll come back here. My gutter value, I'm going to put in 24. I'll come over here, put in 24 dp for the gutter value. So now I have my count sorted. I want to change this to some form of gray for color, which is fine. And then for the type, I also want to keep it set to stretch. The width, I can no longer interact with that like we know. Then the margin is 32 and then the gutter is 24. Automatically, I've configured the grid values for this particular layout. Now for this other tablet layout, which is the iPad Pro 12.9, let's see how we can apply a grid system to this. So I'll come over here apply my box grids first and then change them to column grids, which is fine. Now I want to configure the count, the margin, and the gutter. So automatically, since this is also a tablet device, it's going to have the same gutter as what I have here, which is 24, because all the tablet devices, like we saw, have a gutter value of 24. So I can come over here. The gutter value, I can put this here as 24, which is fine. And then I now have to look for the count and the margin. Now to look for the count and the margin, while I have this selected, take note of the width. This is 1024 pixels. Come back to material design and then look for where I can have 1024 pixels. That should be in between 905 and 1239. Alright, so that falls within this range. Now, under the margin value, it says that we could get the margin by scaling. Alright, we'll come back to this. But then for the column count, it's letting me know that any layout that falls within this screen size range should have a column count of 12. So I'll come back here. For the column count, I'm going to change this to 12, which is fine. I'll change the color to some form of gray, which is fine. The type is set to stretch, which is okay. The gutter value in this case is already 24. So we are left with trying to configure the margin. Now over here, you can see that since it falls under this category, under the margin column, it says that we can get the margin by scaling. So how are we going to get that margin value by scaling? Now, if you look at the category just above this, this is 600 to 904, and it has a margin value of 32 dp, right? Now over here, this is 905 to about 1239, which I could round up to 1200, which simply means that if this is 600 in this case, and it has a margin of 32 dp, for a frame that is about 1200 pixels, is going to have a margin value of, let's say, times 2 of what we have here. All right, this is just a rough estimation or a rough scaling of the size. So if 600 is 32 dp, I could decide that, all right, for is a frame or layout within this range, and since this is 1200, which is twice the value that I have here, automatically the margin value that I could use here could be twice the margin value that I have here. All right, so in this case now, I could use a margin value of 64 dp. So I could come back here. Now that is me scaling the margin value. Now I could come over here and put in 64 dp. And now I'm fine. So with that, now I have configured the count for this particular iPad Pro device. Right? I've actually gotten the margin value which I got by scaling, and I also got the gutter value which is the same for all tablet devices. So with that, now I have put in a grid system for my mobile devices, which is done. I have also put in a grid system for my tablet devices. So over here now, I'm going to put in a grid system for my desktop devices. So of course, I'll select any of them and then apply the layout guide, change that from grid boxes to columns, which is fine. Now, the next thing you want to do is take note of the width, 1440 pixels, come back to material design, and then over here, you can see that it says that I should get the margin by scaling, which is fine. Then for the count or column count, I have a count of 12. So I will go back here. For the count now for my desktop device, I have 12. It's fine. I will change the color to some form of gray, just where I want it. The type should be set to stretch, as that's the most responsive option there. I can no longer interact with this region, so I'll let it go. Then the gutter value. Now in this case, I'm going to give my desktop layout the same gutter value like I gave my tablet layout. Right now, the gutter value for this case is 24 dp. So for my desktop layout, I'm going to select it and also give it the same gutter value of 24. And that is fine. Then for the margin value, I will go back to material design. Now you can see that it says that I should also get the margin by scaling. So what do? Just like we did or treated the other one, let's look at the value that is just above it. Now you can see that over here, this range that is just above it is 1240 to 1439 pixels, right? So 1439 and 1440, the difference is just a 1 pixel value, which simply means that these two values are actually almost the same. So for that reason, I could decide to use this exact margin value that I have here, which is 200 dp. I could decide to use the same margin value for this region. So for my desktop device, I'm going to take this exact value that I have here and use it here where it says scaling. So in my case now, I'll come over here, put in a margin value of 200 dp, which is fine. Now I have something like this. All right. Now remember that using this also is just a guide, just like we did with the mobile device where we had a margin of 16 dp, but we know that we can use a margin of 16 dp, or we can use half that size, which simply means that we can also use a margin of 8 dp for a mobile device. Now the same thing is going to apply here for the desktop device. All right. Now we could either use a margin of 200 dp like we've seen, giving us this particular layout with this restricted or limited content area, or I could decide to come over here and also reduce that margin, let's say by half. Let me go and try 100 dp. Now I have more content area. So for your desktop value, you could pick, in this case, any value between 100 and 200 dp. So I could come over here, make this 100, which is fine. I could come over here, make this 120, which is fine. I could come over here, make this 130, which is fine, depending on the content that I want to be displayed inside this desktop frame. All right. So you could pick any value between 100 and 200 dp. So in this case now, I'm going to be using 120 dp for my desktop frame. And with that, I have configured that for the desktop frame. All right. So I'm using a margin of 120. I'm using a gutter of 24, which is the same gutter like I used for my tablet devices, and the column count is 12. Now this next frame that I have here is also a desktop frame, which simply means that the column count is also going to be 12, which is fine. The margin value, in this case, I could use the same margin value of 120. The gutter value, I could use the same gutter value of what? Of 24. So I could select this and then add a column grid to it, because the count is going to be 12 since it's still a desktop. The margin now, in this case, we are using 120 for desktop margin, which is fine. The gutter value, we are using 24, which is fine. The type is set to stretch, and then the color, in this case, we are using some form of green. Now you could use any color that you want. All right. So you can see how we have been able to configure a grid system to each and every one of these layouts that we have here in our Figma canvas. So now that we've come up with a grid system for all of our frames, you should know that using the material design guide is just as the name implies, it's a guide. All right. So it's not rules that are set in stone, which simply means that you could actually adjust those configurations. You can adjust the count to suit your needs, right? But you don't want to go too far away from the guide. Now, what does that mean? Just like for the mobile device, where material design actually recommended that we should use a margin value of 16 pixels, right? We could decide to use a margin value of 14, like we said, a margin value of 12. So that is you sticking to the guide. So you could pick any margin value between 8 and 16 pixels, and you are fine, depending on how large you want the content area to be. Now, going out of the guide will be you coming in here, putting in a margin value of 60 pixels. So that is you actually going completely out of the guide, because you can now see that we have a very restricted body, or a very restricted content area in this particular case, right? So like I said, it's a guide, so you stick to the guide. Now, sticking to the guide simply means that you may have some form of tolerance, right? 16 or 14 or 8 or 10 or 12, just like that. So for the margin value, you could take any value between 8 and 16. So you take 8, you are fine. Or you could even take 16, you are still fine for the margin value. All right. The same thing applies to every other layer that we actually have here. All right. Because the simple rule is, the bigger the layout, of course, the bigger the margin value that it should have. Because you can see over here that for our mobile devices, the margin values are small, right? For our tablet devices, we have larger margin values. And then for our desktop devices, we have the largest margin value. So for these two devices, I could decide to give this a larger margin value that I gave to this, because this frame is actually much bigger than these that I have over here. So at this point, we now know how to actually customize a grid for our layout, and we've been looking at vertical grids, which are column grids. Now you could also add horizontal grids, which are referred to as row grids, and those row grids are actually important in also guiding the placement of elements inside your devices, especially for smaller screens like mobile devices. So I could come over here to this mobile device, I'll select it, and then in order for me to add a horizontal grid or a row grid, I'm going to come over to the properties panel, and then I have already set in a column grid. Right now, this is my column grid. I'll come over here now and click on that plus icon again and add another layout guide. As I click on it, I'm going to have another box grid applied to this layout. But in this case, I don't want a box grid. I don't want a column grid, I want row grid. So I'll click on this region that says rows. Once I click on it, automatically you can now see that I have horizontal grids or row grids applied to this particular layout. Now in this case, what you want to do in configuring your row grids is that we are going to first of all go to the region that talks about type and change that from stretch to center for our row grids. Now our column grids we all set to stretch, which is fine. For our row grids, I want to change it from stretch and I want to change it to center. So automatically you can now see that the grid lines are just as the center of the frame, right? Now you do not want the grid lines to only end at this point. So for that reason, I'm going to increase the count property till I see the grid lines filling up this particular frame from top to bottom. Now in order for me to do that, I'll come to the count and give it a very high value. In this case, I could go to 1000 and I have something like this. So I have my row grids filling the entire layer from top to bottom, which is actually fine. And after that, I could come over here and adjust the height of these particular grid lines. In this case, I could put in a value of 6 or I could put in a value of 8 pixels and I'm fine. And then I'll come over here to the gutter property, and in my case, I want to set the gutter property for the row grids to 0. Now I have something like this, right? If you zoom in on that, you are going to see that we have our grid lines, right, running horizontally inside this frame from top to bottom. So that is how you can set in horizontal or row grids for a particular frame. Now for your count property, you could put in any value in this case, because remember that we're just trying to make sure that the grid lines actually run from the top of the frame to the bottom of the frame. So I could come over here, my count property, instead of putting in 1000, I could put in 2000. And you see, I am still fine. I could put in 3000. I'm still fine. Just make sure that you have your row grids running from the top to the bottom of that particular frame. Now, if I am to put in, let's say, a shape tool in here, let's say I draw a rectangle, for example, and then I place it, you can see that the row grids are actually helping me, right? By showing me the Figma indicator that helps me align this particular object that I've drawn. So I could just come over here and place it here, which is fine. I could make a copy of this, right? And then place it somewhere here, which is fine. Then make another copy of this. You can now see where the vertical grids or the column grids are helping me now, which is fine. And then make another copy of this and place it here, which is fine. So with the vertical grids and horizontal grids, I have the ability to easily position and align objects or elements inside my layout. Now, anytime you actually set up your row grids, you are going to realize that there's actually a distance between each of these horizontal lines that are running from left to right. All right, so I will select this particular layout. So I select the layout. I'll come over here to the row grids, and you are going to realize that the distance between each of these particular lines corresponds to the height which you have set in here. For example, if I'm to know the distance between this object and this object, right, without that particular tab, I could select this, hold my shift key, select this. I have both of them selected. Hold my alt key, make a copy, bring it out. All right. Now that they are both selected in the same distance that I got them from my frame, I could click on Shift A, put them in an auto layout. Automatically, you can see that the distance between items there is 16 pixels, right, which simply tells me that the successive distance between each of these lines, or the distance between successive lines in this case, is 8 pixels by 8 pixels. So if I have this space here, that's 8 pixels. If I have this other space here, that's also another 8 pixels, making it 16 pixels, right? So the distance between each of these rows or each of these horizontal lines is 8 pixels. And that is actually represented once you check the height property that you actually have here, right? Letting me know that this value of 8 represents the distance between the horizontal lines for the grid. If I come over here and change this to, let's say, 20 pixels, automatically you can see that distance between those lines widens up. If I change it to, let's say, 2 pixels, 3 pixels, you can see it becomes smaller. So we are going to leave it set to 8 pixels in this case. Now I have something like this, right? So with that, I can position elements inside this frame at a distance of 8 pixels from one another. So I could just make another copy of this particular rectangle, select it, make another copy. And then if I want it to be 8 pixels away from this, I'll just have to bring it over here till it aligns with that particular grid line as shown by the Figma guide. So with that, I am now done with positioning that element. So that is one of the advantage of using row grids, and they are usually very important on mobile devices where a small incremental increase in distance is actually needed in positioning elements, or a small incremental increase is actually a significant or shows a significant difference when you are actually positioning elements on mobile devices. So with that, now you could also decide to apply row grids to any of these layers that you have here in a similar manner as it has been applied for this particular layout. So I'm going to select all this, and then I'm going to take all of them out. So we now know how to apply row grids, and we also now know how to apply column grids to the different layouts that we want to use for our website designs and presentations. So now that we know how to go about customizing a grid, the next thing we want to look at is how do I come up with a grid style and repository, or how do I make a grid style and put those grid styles inside a folder. All right. Now you would realize that while we're doing the mid fidelity presentation, we had to use desktop screens for that particular presentation. So if you are to actually apply a grid system to each of these desktop screens, it simply means that you have to select the first layout, go to material design, then configure it, and then once you go to another web page, you select another layout, go back to material design, configure it. Once you go to another web page, you go back to material design and then configure it again. And now that process can actually be very tiring, especially when you have a lot of pages, because you are going to do that for the mobile frame at this particular stage. For the home page, you do it for the mobile, you do it for the desktop, you do it for the tablet. The same thing for the about us page, the same thing for the projects page, and the same thing for any other number of pages that you have, right? So that can be a very, very tedious process. So the best thing you want to do is, after creating for each of these frames, you want to actually come up with a grid style and repository. So how am I going to come up with a grid style and repository? Now that we know how to come up with a grid system, what I'm going to do now is I'll take this out, and then I now have to decide which of these frames that I actually want to use. Now remember that for each category, for the mobile category, we were using 2 frames to actually display how to configure the column count, how to configure the margin, and how to configure your grid system, right? Then for the tablet grid, we also selected 2 frames, right, for that purpose of comparing them and checking their screen size. It's the same thing for the desktop layout. Now at this particular point, I want to select one layout which I'm going to be using for my design for in terms of the mobile layout. I want to select one for the tablet layout. I want to select one for the desktop layout. So for the mobile layout, I'll simply come over here, click on my frame 2, go back to where it says phone. I'm going to collapse this. Go back to where it says phone. We now know that you can select any of these layouts here. So in my case, I want to go with the iPhone 13 mini. I'll select this. Now that I have this, I'm now going to apply my grid values to only this, and I'll be fine and be done with my mobile grid system. So I have it selected. Come over here, go to where it says layout guide, click on the plus icon, then change this from box grids now to column grids, which is fine. Now, in order for me to get the count, I'll come back to this table after, of course, checking the width of this particular layout. That's 375 pixels, which simply means that it falls under mobile. For that reason, the margin value is going to be 16. The layout count is going to be 4. I know that fully well, so I'll come over here. The count is 4, which is fine. The margin is 16, which is fine. The gutter property, in order for me to see the gutter property, I need to come to this region that talks about gutters. So on mobile, the gutter is 16 dp. So I'll come over here and I'll put in 16 dp as my gutter. So I'll come over here, put in 16. That's fine. I'm going to make this some form of gray, which is fine. Leave the type set to stretch, and automatically I am done with configuring the grid system for my mobile frame. So I'll hold this and then drag it and place it somewhere. So this is what I'm going to be using for my mobile frame, and that is all for the mobile device. I'm also going to select a particular frame that I'm going to use for my tablet device. So I'll come over here, click on the frame tool again, right? Once I click on the frame tool, let me click on the empty canvas first, then click on the frame tool, and then collapse this mobile or phone region and expand that of the tablet devices. Now for the tablet device, in this case, I'm going to be picking the iPad Pro 12.9 frame. So I'll click on this, and this is what I'm going to be using for my designs. All right. So I'll come over here, put in a layout guide, change that from, let's say, a box grid to a column grid, and then to configure it, check for the width, 1024 pixels. 1024 pixels falls within 905 and this value that I have here. All right. Which simply means that the layout in this case, or the column count is 12, which is fine. And then for the margin, we need to scale. So first of all, let's go and put in the column count that we've seen. That's 12. It's fine. Change this from this color to some form of gray. That's fine. Leave the type set to stretch. Then for the gutter property for a tablet, I could come over here and you can see it says on the tablet, we use a gutter property of 24 dp. So I'll come back here, put in 24 for a tablet. That's fine. Then for the margin value, of course, I'll now go back to material design and then it's asking me to scale the margin. So if this is 600 and this is 1, 2, it simply means I could use a margin value of times 2 this category. So automatically, if the margin value of this category is 32, for this category, I'm going to be using 64. So I'll come over here, put in a value of 64 for the margin. And I am done with configuring the grid lines or the grid system for this particular device. So I'll take this out and I am fine. After that, I also need a desktop device. Right? I'll click on the frame tool again, collapse this, go to the region that talks about desktop, expand it. For my desktop device, I just want to pick this one here that says desktop with a screen size of 1440 pixels. I'll click on that. Once I click on it, I'll then come over here and apply a layout guide. Change that for my box grids again to columns, which is fine. Then for the count properties, I'll go to material design. Now, this is the category over here. I know fully well that the column count is 12, fine. But then the margin, we are asked to scale the margin. Now, we've already done that. So I'll come over here, put in a column count of 12, which is fine. And remember that we decide to use a margin of 120. You could decide to use a margin of 100 if you want to, right? Depending on how you want the content area to look like. Now for our gutter property, we're using the same gutter value as that of the tablet. So I'm going to make this 24, which is fine. I'll change this now from this shade to some form of gray. And automatically I am done with the 3 devices that I actually want to use. All right. If you actually want to put in, let's say, row grids for the mobile device, in this case, I could also come here, select the mobile device. Since I'm done with the vertical grids in this case, I want to apply a row grid to this particular mobile device for my case. So I'll select it, come back here, click on this plus icon, and then put in column or put in box grids initially. Change that now from, I don't want column grids anymore. I already have column grids. Change that to row grids. Now I have something like this, which is fine. Now for my row grids, just come to the types, set it to center, which is fine. I want these to be all over the frame, right? So I'll come over here, increase that count to, let's say, 1000. Now that's fine. The next thing I want to do is change the color of this to some form of gray, which is fine. Then for the height, I want the height to be 8 pixels, which is fine. Then I want the gutter value between them to be set to 0. Now I have something like this for my row grids or my mobile device. So this is just how I want my grid system to look like. You could decide to put in row grids for this other one if you want to, and then try to increase distance between the horizontal lines. All right. So that's for that. Or you could decide to use the same 8 pixel value distance that we have here. So now that I'm done with creating or applying my grid system to each of the devices that I want to use, the next thing that I want to do is I want to save this grid system as styles. Now, in order for me to save them as styles, the first question becomes, what is the name of the folder where you want to place this grid system? I want to put them in a folder that is labeled grid system. So let's first of all see how we are going to save these as styles. So if I want to put them in a folder, the name of that folder for my case, I want to name that folder grid system. Let's zoom in a bit on that. So grid system, which is fine. We already know that to make this a folder, you need to put in a /. So automatically, this is now a folder. So this is the general folder that is going to contain all of my frames with their grid systems. So for this one over here, it's going to be grid system. Over here, I'll put in mobile device. We'll put in mobile device, mobile frame, or whatever you want to put in. Mobile device. Or let's put in mobile layout. And that's done. Then for the next one, I'll make a copy of this. Place it here. This will be grid system, in this case, tablet layout. That's done. For the next one, I'll just make a copy of this. Place it here. This will be grid system, in this case, this is going to be desktop layout. Alright, that's done. So this is how I'm going to be saving each and every one of these layouts that I have here. Now you can see that one particular folder is generic or common to this three names that I have here, and that is the grid system and the forward slash, which simply means that this region is one folder, right? From the forward slash back to this text that says grid system is one folder, and it is common to all the three of them, which simply means that my mobile layout, my tablet layout, and my desktop layout are going to be in one folder. So in order for me to actually see that happening, I'm going to, first of all, just copy this text, right? And then try to save this as a style. So I'll select this particular frame. And once I select it, I'll come over here to where it says layout guide. Then you can see that there is this icon over here. Once I hover on it, it says apply styles. I'll click on it. Once I click on it, I have this menu come up. Now, once it comes up, there is this plus icon over here. Once I hover on it, it says create style. Click on it. Once you click on it, you have another menu that enables you to actually create your style. You can see it says give the name of the style, right? So I can come over here, click on this input field, and then paste that name that I copied inside there. So by putting in this name that says grid system mobile layout, automatically a folder is going to be created. The name of the folder will be grid system, and it's going to contain a layout or a layout grid, which is the mobile layout. All right, so simply click on create style. You can decide to put in the description if you want, but for my own case, I'll click on create style. Automatically, you can now see that it is now attached to as a style to this particular layout. So that's for that. Now after that, or in order for us to see what we have done, click on the empty canvas. Once you click on the empty canvas, you can see that under this region that talks about layout guide styles, you can now see that we already have a folder here which says grid system, right? So once you expand that folder, the only thing we have in there now is the mobile layout that we've saved. So the next thing I want to do is I want to save the iPad Pro layout or the tablet layout. So I will have it selected and then come over to this region that says layout guide. Over on this icon again that says apply styles, click on it. Once you click on it, this menu comes up. Click on this plus icon that says create styles, click on it. Once you click on it, you can now put in the name of the style for tablet device. I'll Ctrl V to put in the name that I copied. Just that in this case, I'm not going to be having a mobile device. I'll select this and change that from mobile to tablet. When you are trying to edit, make sure you don't accidentally remove this slash behind this text, alright? Because that slash is what makes everything before this tablet layout a folder, right? So that's for that. So now that I'm done with this, like I said, you could put in a description if you want to, but in my own case, I'll click on create style. I'll click on create style, click on my empty canvas, and I have two particular grid styles inside the grid system folder. So that's fine. I'll select the next one there, which is for the desktop layouts. Come over here to this icon that says apply styles, click on it. Once I click on it, this menu comes out. Then click on the create style icon, click on it, and then automatically you can save this particular grid that you've applied to this layout as a style by just coming to the region that talks about the name, and then I will Ctrl V to actually put in what I copied. Change that now from mobile to desktop. And then click on create style. Automatically, I have now created a grid system for a mobile device. I've created a grid system for a tablet device, and I've also created a grid system for a desktop device. Now, what this simply means is that if I'm making a design, let's say I'm actually trying to bring up different desktop layouts, for example, for my high fidelity stage, I could just I could come over here, click on the frame 2. And once I click on the frame 2, I already know the desktop layout which I'm using, which is this one here that is labeled desktop with a size of 1440 pixels. Click on it. And once I click on it, I could just hold and of course expand it because you can increase the height like we said. And then after expanding it, you want to apply a grid system to this. You don't have to go back to material design anymore. All you need to do to apply a grid system to this, come over to this region that says layout guide. But instead of clicking on the plus icon, you are going to over on this icon that says apply styles because it's asking you now to apply a style if you have saved a style before, right? So once I click on it, automatically you are going to see that all the styles which I have created are actually shown here. You can see grid system. I have a mobile layout, tablet layout, and a desktop layout. Now in my case now, I want to put in a desktop layout since this is a desktop device, right? I'll just click on desktop layout. Automatically, you can now see that that grid system has been attached to this. The same thing happens when you choose any particular frame. If I come over here and go and select my iPhone 13 mini layout, which I used before, and then I want to apply a grid system to it, I'll just come over here where it says layout grid, click on this icon that says apply styles. And in this case, since this is a mobile device, I'll click on mobile layout and automatically I have a grid system for my mobile layout. The same thing applies to tablet layout. So in so doing, we've created a grid system for a mobile layout, a tablet layout, and a desktop layout. Now, in our next class, we are going to look at how to create a grid system, or we are going to look at how to actually come up with a typography system. We are now done with creating a grid system. In our next class, we are going to look at how to come up with a typography system and how to come up with industry standard color system for the case study project that we are actually working on.